Welcome to today's interview with Paco Chierici. I don't want to talk a lot about Paco. I think it is the best thing that we jump directly to the first part of the interview. But before we do that, I just want to thank Paco for the time he has given us for this interview exclusively for the DCS Tomcat Aviators Facebook group. So we are very honored. And I would like to give the word to Paco itself to just let us know about what he is doing right at the moment, what he is busy with. And as we all know, there is the latest publications of him, The Lions of the Sky. Maybe he can tell a little bit more of that, and probably some of you know it, but for some of us, maybe it is still a new topic. So I would like to ask Paco to just let us know a little bit of himself.
Sure, absolutely. First of all, thank you, Bobby, for having me on. And it's been a remarkable introduction to this world. Like I had no idea that this existed and that it existed in such high detailed resolution and quality and capacity. You know, with the goggles and the HOTAS and everything. I mean, it sounds incredible. It's very intriguing to me. I'm looking forward to learning more about it. As you mentioned, my name is Paco Chierici. I was a fighter pilot in the Navy for 20 years. And I've been involved in telling the story of the Navy, telling stories my whole life, and telling the story of Navy and naval aviation for probably the last 10 or so years. I started off by doing a documentary when I had about 5 years remaining in my 20 years, called Speed and Angels, which has some of the better F-14 footage I think anybody's ever seen. We shot all that footage ourselves. And then my true love has always been writing, so I enjoyed creating and producing that documentary, and it came out really well. I'm very proud of it. But I do love telling stories through words and painting a visual picture. And so that's why I wrote Lines of the Sky, as you mentioned earlier, and it got published just a couple months ago, just April, and is doing very well. So I think both Speed and Angels and Lines of the Sky give anybody who's interested in learning about naval aviation, the drama, the excitement, the inherent thrill and dangers of that world. They're both great entrees into that world.
I believe there are also some not really happy situations in the book. Is it true that there are some also let's say negative experiences you have made, especially with your comrades?
Oh, yes. So unfortunately, I mean, a harsh reality of naval aviation is that it's a very dangerous business. People die, and it's always happened. It's better now than it's ever been because the planes are better and our use of them is much safer, but it still happens. And in my 20 years, I lost somewhere around 23 friends and comrades, which is higher than average. I just happened to be in some situations or environments where people were crashing or not making it through. But yes, it is, and it's a part of the drama of the story, right?
Very close to real life.
It's very close, yeah. So when I both in the film, you see people dealing with the perils of that world, including death. We portray a very brave female aviator who didn't make it. And in the book as well, I mean, I want to be as honest and realistic as possible. And so, yes, there is death rears its ugly head in the story as well.
I think it is absolute great reading. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm encouraged to go and get one volume of that.
Good.
Very nice. But who is Paco actually.
That's me.
Where did Paco come from, and how Paco came to Navy?
Yeah. Well, I have, in some ways, a non-standard path to the Navy, and in others, more traditional. My father's Italian. I grew up in Italy till I was about 10 years old, then moved back to the States. And so I didn't have any direct connection with the military or the Navy before joining the Navy ROTC, which is an avenue to get scholarship money to go to pay for college. And I needed that. It was important for me to go to college, and we didn't have the means to send me to the schools I wanted to go to. So I took the scholarship, which committed me to service with the Navy afterwards. And I had never been involved in jets or airplanes or anything like that until my sophomore year in college. I got a backseat ride in an F-14, and it changed my life. I mean, it was the most exciting, dramatic thing I'd ever done in my life. And from the moment I just put the flight suit on and climbed into the back as a 19-year-old kid, I was absolutely hooked. And, it was like a uncurable virus. I was completely focused on getting back into naval aviation, because the other choices coming out of college would have been to be a ship driver or join the Marines or even be on submarines. So for me, it was very, very important to have the good grades and be very competitive for the selection process, which happens in March of your senior year. Everybody just kind of gets put in a big pile, and you select according to how high you are in the ranking. So there was a lot of incentive to do well in school and be as high as I possibly could be in that ranking, so that I assured myself an opportunity to go flight school for the Navy.
Right. So why Navy?
I don't know. That's a great question. I've been asked that, a lot of times. I don't really know. There was something about being on a ship, being at sea, flying onto and off of a ship, traveling to foreign worlds, not foreign worlds, but traveling around the world to foreign countries, that was very appealing to me. It held a huge allure, and I'm really glad it was perfect. It's exactly
challenge loving.
Yeah, it's exactly what I hoped it would be. There are other people that they joined the Air Force for exactly the opposite reason. They wanted to be on a big base with a golf course and live a lush life where they went home every night. For me, I enjoyed the hardship and the extremes, the hardship and the extreme fun of being part of what we call an expeditionary squadron. We're always on the move.
Yeah.
And it was great. It fit my personality perfectly. I thrived in it, and I loved every minute that I was flying in the Navy.
Yeah. Great. And I mean, the preparation of pilot's life, I mean, till you get your wings and you get assigned to a squad, there's a long way. You start to learn how to fly, you fly propellers and so on and so forth. But I think the first real jet airplane you flew for Navy was A-6 Intruder. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And to your point, it took me, let's see, I graduated college in May, and it took me till December 1st of 2.5 years later. So 2.5 years to get my wings. And a lot of that was dead time. There was, just waiting for a slot to fit into the training program. So I would say it was only about 18 months of active flight school with almost a year scattered in between there, all together, of dead time, which actually, it wasn't dead for me. It was a lot of fun. I had a good time, but I wasn't involved in training. So after 2.5 years after I graduated from college, I finally got winged. And then during the selection process, I put down the F-14 first, but I got my second choice, which was the A-6 Intruder. And I was disappointed at first. I really, since flying in the F-14, I really passionately wanted to fly F-14s.
Yeah.
And it took me a little while to become accustomed to the concept of being an attack pilot versus we differentiate between a fighter community and attack community in the Navy, or we used to anyway, because it doesn't exist anymore. Now it's all fighter attack. But once I got there, once I started flying the airplane, once I joined the training squadron, and that's almost another year. It took me September to July to finish learning how to fly the A-6 and get carrier qualified and join my fleet squadron. So it took, I think, almost 4 years from the time I graduated college to the time I checked into my very first fleet squadron. So it's not a fast thing. There's a lot of, there's a lot of training, a lot of steps along the way.
What flight wing was that?
Sorry?
What squad was that?
It was VA-155, the Silver Foxes out of Whidbey Island.
Okay.
And I was in Air Wing 2, and Air Wing 2 was assigned to the Ranger, at least at first. We were on the Ranger. No, actually, we were on the Ranger the whole time. The whole time I was with the squadron, Air Wing 2 was on the Ranger, and that was our last, the Ranger's last deployment. So I joined the squadron. The day they came home, they flew in victorious from the first Gulf War in 91. And it was an interesting time to be a new guy in a victorious warfighting squadron that hadn't had a new guy in a long time. But it was a wonderful squadron. I showed up with a bunch of my friends and classmates from training because there was a big rotation of older people out and new people in. And within a few months, we started our what's called a workup cycle, where the squadron and then the air wing and then the whole strike group prepare to go on deployment. And it's about a 9 to 12 month process where you just, you do individual unit level training as a squadron, and then you get together as an air wing down in Fallon and do air wing training. And then multiple times you go out as a air wing onto the aircraft carrier and train with the aircraft carrier, and then the air wing, the aircraft carrier, and then all the support ships in the strike group will get together. And there's about 9 ships in the carrier strike group. So it's a massive undertaking to get all those individual units and all the new people. Every ship has got a huge turnover. Every squadron has got a huge turnover of personnel. And the workup cycle is designed to get everybody spun up so that once they finally get back on the ship for a six-month deployment, everybody is to speed, up to warfighting speed. And like I said, I joined the squadron maybe a couple months before we started our workup cycle again. So I had the great luxury of spinning up the whole process as a brand new guy, getting a year's worth of experience on tactics and deployments and going out to the ship and going to Fallon, dropping bombs, flying low levels. And it was perfect. And then off we went. We went off on my first deployment. About 2.5 years after I joined the squadron, VA-155 was decommissioned. And it was not a surprise. They were drawing down the A-6 because they were anticipating at the time that they were going to bring in a new plane called the A-12, which got canceled. But they were still in process of drawing down the A-6s. And so I, as planned, rolled over to our sister squadron in the air wing, 155, VA-155, the Swordsman. And about a couple months after I got there, we were shocked that we received the news that squadron was going away as well. So all of a sudden I had nowhere to go. And I had to...
not that bad at the end.
What's that?
Which was not that bad at the end.
No, and I wasn't super worried. I mean, it's not like I was going to get fired.
Capable jet airplane, and also very reliable, as my knowledge. I mean, it is what I'm said that it's a very capable and very reliable and nice to fly plane.
Oh, it was a great airplane to fly.
Your love was Tomcat in some way.
Absolutely. Still. Yeah. And I mean, I've told a bunch of funny stories, but the A6 was, if you look at the picture of the A6, it looks like, like a club, like a war club, which is what it was. It's got a huge nose, and, yeah, and very sort of beefy shoulders and a tiny little tail. And it's not meant for, any kind of really fun aerobatic flying, even though we did some stuff. And, I would constantly annoy my squadron mates trying to get everybody to go dogfight with me. And they're like, dude, this is not a dogfighter. This is a war club. We fly low level, super fast through the mountains, all great stuff. But I just couldn't get it out of my blood. So I think this leads into...
You're just forced to go over to Tomcat.
Well, I was lucky, yeah. So I had to put in a big package to switch communities, because in the Navy at the time, it was all very parochial. There it is. And, the people that flew S3s would fly S3s their whole career. Tomcats would fly Tomcats, A6, yeah, and that was who you were for your whole career. So to switch communities was a big deal, and you had to, put together a package and get endorsements from people within the community and your own chain of command and stuff like that. So I think my package was literally 100 pages long with all kinds of different justifications and stuff like that. But anyway, yes, ultimately I was awarded the transition from the A-6 to the F-14. It was a great day in my life. I was incredibly excited. It was like I'd won the lottery. And so I had to go from Whidbey Island, Washington, all the way out to Virginia Beach, Virginia, and spent almost a year there learning how to fly the F-14. And I flew the F-14 A and B out in Virginia Beach, in Oceana. And it felt like coming home. It felt like where I was meant to be. And I really loved that airplane from the moment I sat in the front seat. It was fantastic.
And was that the Black Lions you were assigned to?
Ultimately. So I went through training with the Grim Reapers. That was the training squadron, that what we call the RAG, Replacement Air Group. So I did that for roughly a year. And after I was carrier qualified, I was assigned. So you don't know exactly where you're going to go until after you finish carrier qualifications, because the needs of the squadrons change almost on a weekly basis. Who's coming, who's going. So I finished up, my carrier qualifications. I found out I was going to the Black Lions. The Black Lions were a TARP squadron, which is I don't know if your DCS world does the reconnaissance pod stuff, how 100% accurate you are.
Yeah. This is what they have simulated for F-14B, which is the recent module. F-14A is going to be, I think, introduced in a couple of months. So they have introduced the B version first as Bombcat and with the pods, and then we're gonna have a TF-30 and A version in the later months.
Got it.
I don't know if Super Tomcat, the D is coming. I don't know, but
I'm
sure for A for now.
Okay. Well, yeah. So the TAX pod was the Tactical Air Reconnaissance, or I'm sorry, TARPS pod. Yeah. Tactical Air Reconnaissance pod. It was, a bunch of 3 different cameras that were jammed into this 2,000-pound pod that we carried in the tunnel on the aft station on the left. And so I went through some extra, like 2 more weeks of training to get qualified to fly TARPs, which was great for me. I was glad I got to do that. That was not everybody was a TARPs pilot, so I was happy to be able to show up at the squadron already being TARPs qualified. And then there I was. I went to VF-213 in San Diego in Miramar, and I was a Black Lion. And that was my last active duty squadron in the Navy, was VF-213.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was not the end.
No. Fighter Town. Miramar at the time was
everybody wants to go, right? The crème de la crème.
Well, this picture is actually up in Fallon, but my 2.5 years in Miramar. I didn't
find any better.
No, that's fine. I don't have a lot of, Tomcat sort of candid shots. But most of the shots you have here were publicity shots that were taken during the filming of Speed and Angels.
Yeah.
And so this is all F5 stuff. I was already flying F5s by the time that movie was being filmed. But I mean, Miramar, I have to say, Miramar in the mid-90s, jam-packed full of F-14s. I mean, everywhere you look, there was Tomcats. It was truly Fighter Town, USA. That was painted on the biggest hangar in the center of the ramp there. It was spectacular. It was the sound of TF-30s and GE F-110s all day long, just taking off, blasting out to go out over the ocean and do air-to-air and dogfighting, and then to go east to do the air-to-ground and low-level stuff. It was a wonderful time. The club was amazing. You know, there's lots of fun party time at the Officers Club, and those 3 years I spent in Miramar flying Tomcats were about the best I'll ever have in my life, I think. And much like the A-6, I showed up at the squadron right before workups, and I did a full workup cycle with the F-14, and I had already had the experience of flying the A-6, so I was very comfortable around the boat, around all the, operating around the ship. And again, I don't know what your experience level in the DCS world is, but it's a very, very bizarre and specific to naval aviation environment. And it takes a while to get used to, but by the time I was an F-14 pilot, I was very comfortable in that environment.
Was F-14 one of the jets you have flown in Fighter Town, or?
Yeah, so just to be specific, Fighter Town is Miramar, San Diego, and that's where I flew the F-14 for 3 years. Once I got off active duty, I got into a reserve squadron flying F-5s, and that was up in Fallon. There we go.
The aggressor.
Fallon's a weird place. It's
they just moved to Fighter Town from Miramar to Fallon.
Well, Fallon is not Fighter Town. Fighter Town. So we used to call Miramar Fighter.
It's a weapons school.
Yeah. So the fighter weapons school moved up there. Top Gun, and what's called NSOC, the Navy Strike and Air Warfare Center, moved up to Fallon. But Fighter Town was where all the fighter planes lived. In Fallon, there's very few planes that actually live there. They're not based there. It's a training base. So all the NSOC planes live there. All the Top Gun planes live there, and then VFC-13 lives there as well. And those are the only two squadrons that are permanently based in Fallon. So I would never call Fallon Fighter Town, USA, but it is the home of Top Gun. It's the home of VFC-13 and the home of the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center. But it's a Navy base. It's in the middle of Nevada, which is bizarre in itself because it's not actually near any water. But it's got this incredible array of training ranges and tax ranges. I don't know if you guys know what a tax range is, but it allows telemetry data from the airplanes to be downloaded to debriefing rooms, so you can actually see everything that happened. It's kind of like replaying, I would imagine, a mission in the DCS world. You can see everything that happened, every switch that people moved, every decision they made, in the heat of battle. When an air wing comes to town, we have
a light version of that. It's called TAC View.
Okay, yeah.
You can,
so it'll be similar to that.
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
But when an air wing does come to town, then all of a sudden Fallon, it comes alive. All the ramps fill up with fighter planes, and the skies are full of jets. The air is full of jet noise. So it takes on a different personality when there's an air wing in town, and then the aggressors, obviously, and Top Gun provide the adversary work.
Yeah, which is actually very, very, I can't believe, difficult job.
It is far easier to be an adversary, to be an aggressor, than it is to be what we call a blue fighter.
Oh yeah.
It's easier to be the bad guy. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The bad guy is expected to lose. So if you lose, it's fine. You know, no big deal. You just did your job. And we know what we're going to do, right? So we're trying to defeat the blue forces. And so we have a variety of different tactics. And this is all we do. We do air-to-air exclusively. A blue fighter has to worry about being proficient in about a dozen different things, one of which is air-to-air. And the aggressors, all they do is air-to-air. So we are very, very, very good at being the bad guy. Now that gives us...
You need to know both worlds very well.
Yeah, I mean, we don't. As the aggressor, we're just bad.
Yeah, we're just bad. Okay.
Yeah, we're just bad. We do our job, you know, with gusto. But obviously, the goal is to train up, you know, the active duty squadrons and the fleet squadrons that are going into harm's way. So, you know, we're constantly learning the maneuvers that our adversary nations will use, so that we're proficient in the maneuvers that our fleet pilots can expect to see when they go out. And, you know, we give them all these presentations, and what we like to say is, you know, if they can survive us, then they can survive, you know, any enemy in the world. There's nobody that's going to surprise them. We're throwing everything we can at them by the end of the scenarios, and they become incredibly proficient. So that is the job of the aggressor and the Top Gun school. There is to really challenge the fleet fighters, so that once they're done, they're ready. They're ready to go.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And for sure, Paco, we have lots of questions from the members of the group. And
yeah.
I've collected some, and it would be great if you could give us some answers as far as possible. There are different type of questions. I think there are some general, some regarding BFM, ACM, and so on and so forth. I have tried to just give them a flow. I hope that it is also the way that we are not jumping back and forth in topic. But let's start with the general questions.
Okay.
Anthony was quite interested to know what part of operating the Tomcat in the carrier environment was most challenging, and how did it compare behind the boat with other aircrafts you flew?
Well, I mean, there's no challenge there. So the most difficult thing about landing the F-14, about flying the F-14, was landing it on the ship at night. It was borderline terrifying to land on the ship at night. Really difficult plane to land. And there was a variety of reasons for that. Compared to the A-6, which I had flown before and was super comfortable in, you know, I was a top 10 ball flyer in the A-6. I was the top nugget. A nugget is a first cruise pilot. I was the top nugget in my air wing flying the A-6. And so I was pretty confident that I knew how to fly a plane onto an aircraft carrier. Well, when I got to the F-14, it changed. I never cracked the top 10 in the air wing again, but I still did well. I just couldn't make it into the top 10. And you know, there's a few times landing on that ship at night in the F-14A that I scared the hell out of myself. And I probably have 150 night landings in the F-14, and not a single one of them did I not taxi out of the landing area with legs that were shaking violently. I mean, it was just, it's difficult to explain the level of intensity and adrenaline and terror that is involved in landing, you know, a 56,000 pound jet on a 100,000 ton ship that's moving.
Just moving and also
moving and pitching and heaving.
Pitching,
and
exactly.
Yeah.
In the night.
Yeah. And it's
that's what
it's
I
not
haven't
just
done yet on DCS in the night. So it's a long way to go.
Okay. Well, you know, the interesting thing is that there's a step that gets taken when you you leave the simulated world and you go into the real world. Like, before we go out and land on the ship at night, we do a month's worth of training, landing on runways at night, pitch black runways out on San Clemente Island.
Mm-hmm.
And we do procedure simulators landing on the ship, where it's probably physically just as challenging as landing, on the real thing. But once your butt's on that ejection seat and you're out in the middle of the ocean, and if you really screw up, you're going to crash or kill somebody or yourself, or land in the ocean, or humiliate yourself to the point where you get kicked out of the squadron. There's a variety of different hideous things that could happen to you, and that raises the stress level to.
Yeah, it's a $53 million jet,
Even I don't think anybody ever worried about the money.
Then you lose the jet,
Yeah. So. Nobody really worried about
the on your back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, go ahead.
Yeah, this is interesting to know, but you're talking about the landing statistics and so on. And can you remember also the number of wave offs you did?
Yeah, I was pretty good. I didn't have many wave offs. I should have probably pitched through my logbook, but I never had more than one in one night, which is pretty good. And I don't know, maybe a dozen at the most. I was pretty good about getting on board. I wasn't always pretty, but I was good at getting on deck. I never had there's a lot of people that experience this thing called a night in the barrel, where they just go around, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. And it's not uncommon for a pilot to have a night like that in his career or her career, where they're just, through a variety of different circumstances, whether it's mechanical coupled with, the weather coupled with, stress levels, they just have multiple either wave offs or bolters. I never had that. I never boltered or waved off more than once. And I would safely say that I probably got waved off less than 10 times in my whole career.
It's very encouraging for us because we do lots of wave offs.
Yeah.
Rounds.
I probably boltered to, I don't even know. I mean, nobody likes to really think about that. But, those things are all calculated in your landing grades. And my landing grades were always pretty good, top third, top quarter of my squadron, top third of the air wing. So, just by pure academics, or numerics, I was not boltering or waving off too much. But there were, I flew with guys in my squadron. My CO was unbelievable. I mean, he was the best ball flyer I've ever seen in my life, and he was flying an F-14. It was just incredible. The man was made to land an F-14 on the aircraft carrier, and he never seemed perturbed or even disheveled. Killer Killian, just an amazing.
I think everybody knows him.
Yeah, amazing pilot.
Cool.
Yeah, and there was a bunch of really, really good ball flyers in my squadron. So.
Yeah, the next question is kind of, I think, general. I believe everybody is interested to know, as Pedro has asked, how real was the legendary capabilities of the Tomcat in real life comparison to the movies and literature? There are lots of talks and rumors about how capable F-14 in reality was.
Yeah.
And there's also these old discussion of F-14 or F-15, which is better and which one is still better at this time, in comparison to F-14 at his operational time. So there are always some mystical around a Tomcat and every fighter jet, but how real is that? What would we see? I mean, movies, okay, different story, but we have lots of literatures and also experience told. So how let's say,
Yeah.
legendary, what are the capabilities of Tomcat?
So, you can only compare things to the era that they lived in, right? Like the F-14 that I flew was no match for the F-22 or even the F-35,
Yeah.
or even today's F-15. But those are different airplanes than they were at the time. When the F-14 came out in the early to mid 70s, it was revolutionary. The ability to track while scanned, to track 24, shoot 6 targets at the same time. That was
the range itself.
The range of the radar, which was huge. I mean, it was easily triple what fighters had been able to, detect and track prior to that. So, from the mid 70s to maybe about 1990, a big 15-year period there, almost a whole generation of fighter planes. There was nothing on planet Earth that could have kicked the Tomcat's butt. It was a beast, and for a variety of reasons. Once other planes started getting significant radars, and then with the introduction of the AMRAAM changed the game significantly. Even though it didn't have the range of the Phoenix, and the range of the Phoenix was something that hasn't even been approached yet. It was a missile that,
and the speed.
The speed, I think, is the same, but it's just the sustainability is like an AMRAAM. And again, I'm just pulling these numbers out of my butt because I've never carried an AMRAAM, so I don't know. But I think it's like got a 6 or 8 or 9 second burn time on its motor. So, the way missile speed is calculated is usually it's somewhere around Mach 4 or Mach 5 added to the speed of the airplane.
Yep.
So if you're going, Mach 1 and you shoot the missile, it's going to be a Mach 6 missile, say. And it'll burn for 8 seconds, and then whatever it's doing after that is a glide. It's obviously very aerodynamic, but it's still gliding. And the more you make that missile maneuver, the more it's going to piss away its energy. Now the Phoenix had like a 60-second burn on the motor. I mean, it's 10x. 10x, and it had a 120-second battery. I mean, it's a 1,000-pound missile, so it's an enormous missile with I think a 300-pound warhead. So there's nothing like it out there. The A-6 that the Soviets built was an attempt to come close, but it wasn't anywhere near it. And then obviously it was the first active missile. So at a pole, it was active. You could cut it loose, and it was doing its own thing. And being fairly large in diameter, it had a fairly large radar dish, so that helped it, to acquire and hang on to a target. So it was an incredible missile. You and I talked a little bit before we started recording. The U.S. never had an air-to-air kill with the AIM-54. The Iranians, I believe, have a number of them. I don't have the specific data on that, but it's nice to see that the missile was used at least properly.
Just because there was no let's say data or statistic for Phoenix. Phoenix were let's say under doubt in U.S. if it's worth really producing, because it was very, let's say, expensive. $447,000 US, I think.
Oh, it was more than that. By the time they were done, so I shot in my career, I think 5 Phoenix missiles, and every time we shot one, we were like, well, there's another $1 million. So
exactly. So
and they all struck. I only had one that had an error. It popped off the bottom of my airplane, and the Phoenix, the way it works, and I'm sure you are all familiar in the DCS world, but it doesn't fire live off the rails. It pops off like a bomb, and then about 2 seconds later, the rocket motor ignites. And so I shot one, and then I shot my second one, and it came off the airplane, and it was hovering basically right underneath me, trying to go up and do its MBAM maneuver. And my wingman said, brake left, because if that motor had ignited late, it would have gone right through my airplane. So it eventually just lost airspeed and tumbled into the ocean. But out of the 5 I shot,
I know of a story that the Phoenix chased the firing jet. It was through Iran-Iraq war.
Oh, really? Wow.
Exactly. It has happened in in reality. So
yeah.
The heat blower should go and build the error in.
Yeah. So to answer Pedro Ortela's question, it was an amazingly capable airplane for about 20 years. And then with the introduction of new raw gear, the radar warning receiver gear, the AMRAAM itself, and then higher resolution radars, it started to become an obsolete airplane. It was just, obviously it doesn't have any stealth features. It's, the flying tennis court. But, if you were just going to take an F-14 guns only against an F-15, as long as you had the big motors on it, the GE F-110s, yeah, you could, a capable pilot would have a really good fight against an F-15 because they had basically the same engines, but they had stiff wings.
Geometry, right? Geometry of the wing.
Well, no, it's what I'm speaking of is the leading edge devices, which would come down to provide additional lift, and the trailing edge. So, when your wings are out at 20 degrees, so fully swept, you can thumb out the leading edge slats and the trailing edge slats to give you increased lift. The F-15 does not have that. It's a stiff wing airplane, so there's no maneuvering devices at all in high angle of attack.
Yeah, that's what I meant with the geometry of the wing. So because you can
oh, okay. Well,
extend your wing, and you have more drag, and then you can actually pull on the stick, and you have a very let's say smaller let's say turn at low
smaller radius turn.
Yeah.
When we discuss geometry of the wings, we're talking about wing sweep. So from 20 to 68 degrees.
Yeah. Good. Philip asked, those dogfighting scenes in Speed and Angels are amazing. How were they filmed? I think you just shortly said that it was filmed in Fallon, if I'm right.
We filmed most of it in Fallon. So the way it worked in short, and this is a very long story, Philip. First of all, thank you. Yes, I agree. They were amazing. And that was my big job in the movie. I was the aerial coordinator and the choreographer for the dogfight sequences. The very, very short answer to a much longer answer is that we had a great audio that we wanted to share with the viewer, right? So you want to make the viewer feel like they're in the cockpit, and so I choreographed a bunch of different individual maneuvers that we would film from a Learjet, a specially modified Learjet that had cameras like on a periscope at the top and the bottom, and then we put cameras within the planes themselves, on the heads of the pilots, and the HUD camera obviously is already there. And then there was a mountain in Fallon called Fairview Peak, where I think they filmed a bunch of the scenes from the first Top Gun. And we went up there as well. It's a perfect vantage point, right over a huge valley that has the target ranges on it. And we would have the pilots execute these pre-briefed choreographed maneuvers one after the other. And then when we went into editing, we would cut and paste the scenes together to make sense so that the audio made sense. And so that's how you recreate a real dogfight in a way that makes it visually compelling. Because if you didn't do it that way, it would actually look quite dull. So you have to tell the story in a little bit of a fabricated way.
Okay, I think Fallon is turned to a movie town at the moment because
yeah, exactly.
He also filmed there, so
yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So I think we slowly move to the more or less BFM ACM questions, and Brent has asked, I've heard people say that it's best to turn roll step off when entering into the merge. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, so the roll computers would work against you if you were in like a high alpha or super dynamic maneuvering. So before and I had forgotten about that. So I actually pulled out, I've got a bunch of my old checklists and old, my NATOPS manual here. I've got it open right here in front of me. And then I've got my tactical manual pocket guide, which we used to carry with us. And again, one of the checklist items for the pre-combat switch position checklist. The very third item on that was roll SAS off. Like I mentioned, it was, if you're in a high alpha, highly loaded environment, say you're in a high G turn across the horizon and you want to reverse, you would neutralize, roll to the left, and full stick deflection. A roll SAS would actually fight you a little bit if you didn't turn it off, because it was designed to augment stability. And dogfighting is inherently unstable. It's a very dynamic and uncomfortable flight environment.
Well, this is what I did always, and this is the confirmation that this was correct. The second BFM ACM question comes from Andy. He was interested in knowing which BFM maneuvers do the Tomcat perform well and which should be avoided.
Well, that's a good question. So it depends on the engines that you had. If the TF30 engines, as I'm sure your community is aware of, were really stall prone, especially at high angle of attack, high alpha. So if you're at really high alpha and you reversed your roll, so you're in a left-hand turn, loaded up, and then you wanted to change direction, go back the other way, and you weren't careful about unloading, you would mask the intake of one of the engines, and you would get into a stall. So that famous scene in Top Gun where he's in a flat spin. Yeah, that's a real thing. That's as hokey as that was, where they started out over the desert and they ended up ejecting in the water. That is a real thing. That is a danger area that was quite accurate to the real F-14. The GE engines didn't care. They would run through anything. You could do whatever you want to them. In fact,
throttle back and forth, and
you could jam the throttles back and forth. You could be at high alpha and roll. You could. I knew a guy who was really good, Shaggy Allwine. I remember him talking about this. He would go pure vertical, and then in full blower, and then he would pirouette the jet, which is a maneuver to swap ends. So in very confined space, you go from nose up to nose down. He would pirouette the jet by pulling one of the throttles back to mill power, and the other throttle would stay in burner, and then he would add rudder to that, and the plane would just pivot, and it would completely change directions without displacing itself across the sky, which was incredible. I was able to do that in the A, but it wasn't the same. I would leave obviously both engines in full blower, but I had to unload full rudder in one direction, full forward and opposite aileron, and the plane would just very gracefully pivot around itself. It was really neat to do. The best maneuver in the F-14, especially the A, was two-circle fight. So it was, with those big elevators and a super powerful radar, it was great to hit the merge, turn across your bandit's tail, and go two circles. So you're trying to eat up the degrees in a circle as quickly as you can. And as you're coming back around, assuming that your adversary has done the same thing, so now he's about 2-3 miles away from you, as you're coming back around, hopefully because you're in an F-14, you would be able to come nose on first. And if my memory serves, it was a 307 knot was a corner speed, and just out of Buffett, and come around nose on first, get a radar lock, and shoot your missile. And if you could do that, you'd win a lot of fights. The other thing you could do really well was go hit the merge and go pure vertical. If your opponent didn't have as many knots, say they came around nose first, but they weren't at corner speed, so they were bled down, you could merge with them, go pure vertical, and you would just go freaking up to the moon And if they weren't able to, if you had made an assessment correctly and they were unable to follow you, then you would be able to pitch back down, and from about 10,000 feet above them, you just pick your reentry and shoot them with whatever weapon you chose. I think I already described, what you didn't want to do in an A. And in general, in an F-14, since we weren't very good at high alpha slow flight maneuvering. So if we were fighting something like a Hornet, which is really amazing at flat scissors, you wouldn't want to get caught in flat scissors with an F-14. So our general rule of thumb was, if you're fast, stay fast, like stay above 250 knots, ideally 350, 307 if you're in a 2-circle flow. And if you're going to be slow, do it for a reason, like coming up over the top so you can get your nose right back down under your opponent, or to kill. You do anything you want to, if you're going to kill somebody, if you're going to shoot them, get a missile off. But try not to get caught around 250 knots. That's the region that the F-14, especially the A, was really, really vulnerable in. It wasn't able to do anything.
Yeah. And I think this is something which, as you said, the Pratt and Whitney engines were kind of very vulnerable, let's say, when it came to compressor stall.
Yeah, they were vulnerable and they weren't as powerful. The GF-110, it was like having a third engine on. It was a 33% increase in thrust with 100% increase in reliability. So it was a massive difference. I got a few F-14B flights and it was incredible.
But I think it is not a matter of engine. The fact that you have to also you have to be ready to face flat spins and spins in general in Tomcat.
Yeah, the Bs were not nearly as, the big engine planes were not as susceptible. Flat spins came from having an engine failure at high alpha. That was the vulnerability. So you'd all of a sudden, if you would turn into a Frisbee because the engines are separated by about 14 feet, and if you're in full afterburner and you're at high alpha, so you're not moving forward, you're kind of transiting the forward at a very slow speed. All of a sudden you lose one of the engines, there's a huge yawing motion, and it would just send the plane into a flat spin. The Bs and Ds didn't experience that nearly as much because their engines just didn't fail.
Yeah, but how would you counter that? What's the correct procedure
to counter a flat spin?
To recover.
Well, to break alpha is the number one thing. So you pull your power back, break alpha, try to get your nose down.
Let it glide down vertically and then gain speed, and then try to just
opposite rudder. Yeah, so I'm actually looking through
right?
I'm looking through my my NATOPS here to see if I can get the exact procedures for you. But philosophically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to break the stall. You're trying to get the nose down about more than 10 degrees nose down, so that it would actually get some airflow over the wings again, and then opposite rudder would get you. Oh, here we go.
Is it any help of just let's say turning? Cut the one throttle, one engine down to idle, and then let the other one, I don't know, military on or on afterburner?
No, that was proven ineffective. But here, I'll read you straight out of the NATOPS manual. Above 100 knots, use longitudinal stick to pitch the nose down. And at extremely nose-high attitudes, aft stick facilitates recovery time and will avoid prolonged engine operation with zero oil pressure. Below 100 knots, release controls and wait for the aircraft to pitch nose down. If roll and yaw develop, wait until the aircraft is in a nose down attitude and accelerating before correcting with rudder or lateral stick. So the first thing you would do is neutral rudder and neutral stick, push nose down. Upright flat spin. So upright flat spin, forward forward, neutral laterally, harness lock, rudder opposite the direction of the turn needle, stick into the direction of the turn needle. If your engine stalls, both throttles to idle. If recovery is indicated, controls neutralized, recovery 17 units angle of attack. If in a flat spin, canopy jettison, Rio command eject. So, I mean, if you got yourself into a flat spin, basically the emergency procedure is called for you to eject.
Okay.
It was almost unrecoverable.
This is what the Jester AI is very good at DCS.
Yeah.
Most of the time when you have someone on your sixth, he ejects.
Okay. That's funny.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so stick forward, neutral lateral, lock your harness, rudder opposite direction, turn needle, and that's it. Upright departure, flat spin. If no recovery, stick into the direction of the turn needle, and if your engine stalls, both throttles to idle. That's it. It was pretty simple.
We need to exercise a lot.
Yeah.
I know that it's just made to recover one or two flat spins, but it was, I think, very intuitively. I didn't know the recovery procedure and everything, but it's not something you can do every time. I think sometimes you have no choice to just eject, I believe.
Yeah.
When it gets too hard. So I think this is the last question we have,
Okay.
and then we can relieve you. How could F5 keep up with Tomcat? How do you manage the power best to beat Tomcat? I mean, we know that very good. I mean, I have been watching some Top Gun procedure training and so on, and they were always telling F-14 Tomcat, okay, just pull up, go in a vertical, go on afterburner, and then at some point of time, F5, let's say smaller jets, needs to go down with the nose, and then is the time you turn back and then put yourself under 6 and then fire. Just because
I mean,
you see this weakness of F5 engines. But what you can do when you're in F5 and you want to just let's say counter these F-14 maneuvers, what is the best thing you can do? Stay down and wait for him to come, or just counter him?
well, it depends. So if the way we flew as adversaries in the F5 was we flew a very slick airplane. There was nothing, if we're actually dogfighting against the Tomcats, we would have no tanks, no rails, just a AIM-9 on one wing and a tax pod on the other wing. So it's a very, very slick airplane, which makes a massive amount of difference. The Tomcats that we were fighting against were usually what we call cruise configured, which means they had tanks and rails. So there's a lot of drag there. Even though they have more thrust, they still have drag to deal with, and drag is a killer. So, if you're hitting the merge, say you're doing what's called a butterfly star, where you're hitting the merge, you're at an unknown airspeed, you would go as fast as possible, even to the point of almost supersonic. And then you would go pitch into the vertical. Straight up. And if the Tomcat came with you, then what I would do is I would pull into the Tomcat. Instead of just trying to match him like a rocket ship, I would pull towards him and try to get a shot on him from a mile or so away. And that would force the Tomcat to pull towards me and to defeat that shot. And I would do it very gingerly so that I still had a lot of energy. And after that merge, I would be able to, depending on how that played out, I would be able to either stay level, or if it happened early enough, go up and do what's called a double Immelman. And I only did that a few times because it's a really difficult maneuver to do in an F5. It's not a real double Immelman. You do a series of two Immelmans, with a little bit of time between the two so that you can get a couple extra knots. But you can do it. You can go back up once you get up to about 250 knots, and then pitch back up and do another Immelman.
It's getting a little bit more difficult when you have when you're guns and you're very close to adversary, and you don't have a chance to just fire Sidewinder, and then
you can shoot him.
It's very close
your nose at him.
to be able to just hit him by guns. So this is exactly where F5 suffers most, I believe.
I don't know. I mean, I love flying against Tomcats in my F5 for a variety of reasons. One, I was in a clean airplane. Two, if they lost sight of me, which was highly likely because it was a tiny, tiny little airplane, if they lost sight of me, then I would, almost guaranteed a victory at that point. And I was able to maintain my nose on them to the point where they were not able to maximize their the excesses that they had on the airplane. So they had these, whether it was the D's, the B's, or the A's, they had a much bigger engine. Yeah. So you just had to be really smart. One of the things another thing I would do is hit the merge and turn really, really aggressively one circle. So do what's called an energy excursion. So I bleed down a little bit, but I wouldn't come all the way around. So, the Tomcats, say we hit the merge left to left, and the Tomcat cuts across my tail in a 307 knot, two circle flow. I would reverse my turn and turn super hard back into him, but not all the way around. So I would do about 90 degrees of really, really hard turn and then ease off and start getting knots back. And then all of a sudden I had the ability to be inside his turn and go vertical, or reverse again. Like if he reversed at that point and then I would be able to come left, then that was easy. Then I'd have that fight won. If he kept his two circle flow all the way around, then I would be able to go vertical now. So he'd be in two circle flow horizontal and I'd be one circle flow out of plane. So, the biggest thing is you want to disrupt your opponent's ability to execute his game plan. So that's the key to fighting or dogfighting somebody when you have an inferior airplane, is to disrupt their ability to do what they want to do. So you do the unexpected, or you jam their shots, and all while realizing that you're fighting from behind until you can force them to make a mistake or cause them to make a mistake. And once they make a mistake, then you should be able to capitalize on that.
Okay.
So you can't fight your best F5 against an F-14.
Okay.
If that makes sense. You have to do other things. You have to be creative in a way that's not necessarily.
It is at the end the pilot who wins a dogfight. I mean, the plane
not always,
plays
but yes.
a big role. But I mean, a good pilot in F5, I think he can let a F-14 pilot bleed.
Yeah, I mean, listen, a good pilot in an F5 versus a bad pilot in an F-22 is going to lose every time. It's not always the pilot.
What is really a pain at the moment when it comes to dogfight in DCS are those Mirages. They have
the 2000s.
They're very, very agile, and they can turn in a massive way. Very, very hard to dogfight. So with, I mean, in DCS world, you have absolutely, I mean, I wouldn't say absolutely, but most of the time, less chance to win a dogfight against a Mirage.
Sure. So in the real world, I mean, in our squadron fought the UAE Mirage 2000-5s in 95, I think it was. Anyway, they were incredible for the first 90 to 180 degrees of turn, but they bled like crazy. So they're super fast. They were able to pull 9Gs. But if you were able to jam them and make them do what's called follow-on BFM, then they became extremely vulnerable. So once you got them below the ability that they could actually turn 9Gs, if you could keep your nose pointed at them and make them reactionary, then they became pretty average, I must say.
That's what I'm going.
But that first couple turns when they had a lot of speed and were able to keep that 9G pull, yes, it's eye-watering. So it's all about getting on to follow-on BFM. You got to survive that first two merges, and then once you're done with that and you're into the world of real thrust to weight and real lift vectors, then the Mirage 2000-5 was much more easy to deal with at that point.
This is absolutely what we're going to try. I mean, we love Tomcat. We don't like to lose, and we do our best. So there are lots of plane out there we need to encounter. F-16 is going to be
yeah, the F-16 is not.
Soon. I think it's going to be a very, very hard and tough stuff.
Yeah,
to go in a
that's not one you're going to be able to beat too easily.
I think it's not very easy.
I don't think I've ever beat an F-16 in no matter what I was flying in a dogfight, because it's just
so better get an F-16 module than stay in a Tomcat.
Yeah, if you're gonna go guns only, the F-16 is the king of the block. It's the best dogfighter out there.
Yeah, sure. We're talking about dogfighting. I mean, F-14's let's say advantage is definitely the AUG-9 and the Phoenix. When it comes to within visual range, it's going to be a little bit difficult in general.
Yeah.
But it has also its advantages. Also in dogfighting, you know, the variables sweep wing, and then also the fact that you can also turn in very low speeds in comparison maybe to other planes. So some things you need to master. But Paco, the final question: would you fly the Hitler's F-14B on DCS World one day, or do you?
You know, I have to tell you, Bobby, I didn't used to be very interested in it, but after speaking with you and hearing about the goggles and all that kind of setup, I'm super intrigued.
Yeah, I think if you do that, you need to go VR. I mean, the VR is in the beginning, in the early beginning, and the resolution is not that crispy, but it feels so real, and I think it is the future. But yeah, we'll work on you.
All right, I'm intrigued for sure.
Well, it is not that the you cannot compare it with the real life flying career, but I think it is we have lots of F-16, F-18 pilots, real pilots who fly that on the private, and also other retired pilots. But what is your what are you busy with these days? I mean,
yeah.
Besides writing books and so on, are you doing something which is directly connected with flying?
I am, yeah. So I love flying. Flying is a huge part of my life. And I have a Yak 50, which is an aerobatic airplane that I go out and dogfight with a bunch of other buddies that I have that also have Yak 50s. So we dogfight probably once or twice a month. It's very intense. It's not quite the same speeds, but it's we pull 6, 7, 8 Gs, no problem.
I saw a video. I didn't know that you owned that.
Yeah, I own it with a bunch of other people, or well, two other people. So it's
cool.
Me and two other guys own my Yak 50, and then but there's I think 6 Yak 50s just in the Bay Area alone, and we get together with a bigger group every 6 months. We go down to San Diego and fly. There's like 24, 25 Yaks. Not all of them are 50s. Some of them are 52s, the 2-seaters. But yeah, so I still do a lot of dogfighting. I still love it. It still, feeds my soul and fills me with passion. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I do a lot of writing. I'm working on the sequel to Lines of the Sky right now. Hope to have that out before the movie Top Gun comes out. Because one of the things that I've learned watching that trailer the other day, my sequel has my main character flying an Iranian F-14 back to the carrier, and obviously it looks like from the trailer yesterday that Top Gun 2 is going to have some sort of version of the same thing.
Okay, yeah, it is. I think they have taken some parts of the Top Gun 1 and then, I don't know, updated it and put it in Top Gun 2, I think. Yeah, I think there are some parallels there. But
yeah,
I think it is a movie you're all going into the movie theater to watch. But I don't know if it is as good as Top Gun 1. it's gonna
Who
happen.
knows? Who knows? Hopefully it'll be as good.
We're excited.
Yeah, of
So,
course.
Paco, I'm so thankful, and we are so honored that you just spend your time doing this interview with us, and we are so glad that you're part of the community. And well, I can only thank you, and we're going to post it on the group, and we're going to see probably very, very good positive reactions to that. Probably people who hasn't had any chance to just post the question in advance, or just join the group after we announce the video or the interview announcement. They're gonna come back to you, or as a comment to
Yeah.
video
And
post.
Bobby, I was going to
Gonna
say that,
bombard you with everything. So thank you for everything you do for the community, and then
sure.
wish you best of luck.
I was going to say that if anybody wants to have some follow-on questions, my website is lionsofthesky.com, and there's a contact the author portion there. So if anyone has follow-on questions, they can go to lionsofthesky.com.
Perfect. We'll do that. And with that, thank you again to just for your readiness and your commitment, and the interview and the time you gave us. And
Hey, man, my pleasure.
I'm really happy that you have there in the community, and we are going to stay in touch, and wish you a nice Sunday, rest of the day with your family and loved ones, and talk to you soon, I hope.
All right. Talk to you too. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.